Today in Tarkir Dragonstorm, we get a land destruction dragon, an absurd combo enchantment, some spicy sagas, and so much more. Let's break them down. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron, and it's time for another daily dose of Tarkir Dragonstorm spoilers. So we've reached day 2 of spoiler season, and we have some super cool cards to talk about today. So far this set is looking like one of my favorites in a long time, which means we should probably jump right into it, start talking sweet new Tarkir Dragonstorm cards. Before we do, 2 quick reminders. First, to keep up on all the latest previews throughout the day, you should head over to MTGPreviews.com. Second, if you need any of these cards, you can pre-order them from our sponsor Card Kingdom over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. Anyway, let's talk some Tarkir Dragonstorm. So first up today, we get a new mythic teamer enchantment in Dragonback Assault. So Dragonback Assault, 6-mana enchantment. When it enters, it deals 3 damage to each creature in each planeswalker. So a very expensive sweeper, but a sweeper that's on a permanent, so you can blink it, or if you have like an Elish Norn, you could Panharmonic on it. And then landfall, whenever a land enters under your control, create a 4/4 red dragon creature token with flying. So interestingly, this is the second mythic clan-based 3-color enchantment that we've seen from the set. So I'm starting to think that maybe there's a cycle of these mythic ETB enchantments. It'll be interesting to see. Maybe it's not a full cycle, but at this point it seems kind of likely. So hyped to see what the rest of these look like. As far as Dragonback Assault itself, it's essentially a really expensive Brotherhood End, the creature and planeswalker damage mode, mixed with a better Rampaging Bayloss. So Rampaging Bayloss that makes 4/4 flyers instead of 4/4 ground creatures. Plus it's on an enchantment, so it's going to be less likely to die to creature removal or whatever than a Rampaging Bayloss. So what are we doing with this card? And I think there's a few different possibilities. So first, it's obviously designed to be some sort of landfall style card. In standard right now, we got Nisari Surge and Animus, we got Bristleybill, we have literal Rampaging Bayloss. So maybe there's some sort of like landfall ramp style deck. You just play all the land-based ramp that you can fit into a deck, and then play all these landfall things, and trust that Dragonback Assault is kind of just going to win you the game by making a whole bunch of 4/4s. So I think that's one possibility. It also seems like just a good ramp card. Maybe you're playing a straight up ramp deck, a Domain Overlord style deck. If you're playing Overlord of the Hallwoods and Lumbering Worldwagon and Invasion of Zendikar, it's pretty easy to ramp into this, and then when every one of your ramp spells is coming along with a 4/4 flyer, you're going to take over the battlefield super quickly. So I think it could just be like a good ramp finisher. Also seems absurd with Doppelgang, and this is what I want to do with the card, is just ramp, play this to sweep your board, and then Doppelgang it a bunch of times to sweep your board really good, and then every land that we play is going to be making like 5 dragons or something, and we just win the game in 1 or 2 a turn. So I know everything combos with Doppelgang, but these enchantments with ETB triggers actually work incredibly well with Doppelgang, so Doppelgang just keeps getting better. The other thing that's notable about this card is it makes dragons, which opens up some weird combo potential. And this is probably like either against the odd stuff or commander stuff. But think of enchantments like Dragon Tempest. Whenever a dragon enters the battlefield under your control, it deals X damage to target creature or player where X is the number of dragons you control. Or Scourge of Velkis. When it or another dragon enters, it deals X damage to creature player where X is the number of dragons you control. The same thing. So if you have a Dragonback Assault and you have one of these cards, and maybe you Scape Shift and you just sack all your lands, get a whole bunch more lands, you're going to make a ton of dragons. All those dragons are going to trigger the Dragon Tempest or the Scourge of Velkis. You're just going to burn your opponent or the entire table out on the spot. So it seems like a fun combo-y way to build the deck. In Commander, I think there's a couple of possibilities here. First, you could play this in basically any dragon deck. Dragon decks usually have a lot of expensive cards. You're probably going to be ramping with land-based ramp anyway, and then you're just going to trigger Dragonback Assault a bunch of times. The sweeper mode, not super exciting in Commander, but it still could pick off some smaller creatures. And there is an upside, which is since it's only 3 damage, it's probably not going to hurt any of your dragons, because dragons tend to be pretty big. So I could see jamming this for fun in Dragon or Tiamat or Miram. The question is there actually going to be enough room for this card? I don't think it's a staple or anything, and it definitely goes up in value if you're playing like the Dragon Tempest stuff, the Scourge of Velkis. If you want to build around it a little bit, it gets even better. The other place you can play this is just as a landfall card. Like, you could ignore the dragon synergies and just play it like a Rampaging Bayloss, where maybe you're playing an Omnath or a Flubs the Fool, and you're like, all right, I'm just going to play Dragonback Assault. I'm going to play a bunch of ramp spells and make a bunch of land drops. I'm going to make a ton of dragons. Hopefully that's enough to win the game. So Dragonback Assault, I like this card. I think the card is probably going to have to go in a ramp deck, both because of landfall and because it's 6 mana. And the sweeper mode is honestly a little bit sketchy at its current price, just like Brotherson is 3 mana for the same amount of damage. So you really do need to be ramping and having a plan for the landfall mode. But in the right deck, this seems like a very, very solid finisher and even has some combo potential once you get back to formats like Commander. We also got, speaking of combo-y enchantments, this Sibsig Ceremony. And I absolutely love cards like this. So it's triple black mana for a legendary enchantment. This says creature spells you cast cost 2 less to cast, so an absurd discount on your creatures. But whenever a creature you control enters, if you cast it, you destroy that creature, and then you create a 2/2 black zombie druid creature token. So the Sibsig Ceremony, closest comparison, probably Heartless Summoning. So Heartless Summoning's very similar, the 2 mana discount on your creatures, but its downside is creatures you control get -1/-1. The Sibsig Ceremony, a little bit different. Any creature you actually cast with it on the battlefield, it's going to get blown up, but you're going to get a 2/2 black zombie creature token instead. So what are we doing with Sibsig Ceremony? And the first thing to know about this card is I don't think this is a card that you play fairly. You can't just really jam this in a deck because you're going to end up locking yourself out of the game, locking your creatures out of the game. So you can't just really play it fairly. Instead, I think this is mostly a combo piece. The good news is there are a bunch of ways to combo with this card. So easiest combo I can think of is actually very similar to Heartless Summoning combos that we've played in Modern in the past. 2 Mirror Retriever. So Mirror Retriever, 2 mana artifact. When it dies, you can return another artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. So the idea is you have the Sibsig Ceremony, you cast a Mirror Retriever, it's going to get blown up by Sibsig, you get a 2/2 zombie druid. Then you play the second Mirror Retriever, it gets back the first one, Sibsig Ceremony kills it, it goes to the graveyard, you get a zombie, and then you just keep looping them forever to make infinite 2/2 black zombies. So you could do the exact same thing with Heartless Summoning. The thing is, Heartless Summoning required another additional piece to actually be the finisher, because just looping 2 Mirror Retrievers forever with Heartless Summoning doesn't actually do anything. Sibsig Ceremony takes care of this. It's essentially Heartless Summoning combo, except you need 1 less piece to win the game because you just loop the Mirror Retrievers, make infinite 2/2s, use those to win the game. It also really easily goes infinite with Gravecrawler, and I know everyone's gonna say, oh look, you broke Gravecrawler, because everything combos with Gravecrawler, but I actually think this does illuminate how Sibsig Ceremony actually works. So the combo itself, like a lot of Gravecrawler combos, if you have a zombie and cast Gravecrawler from the graveyard, you have Phyrexian Altar, which you can sack a creature to make a mana, so you can like Gravecrawler, sack it to Phyrexian Altar, it's gonna die, you get the zombie, then you cast it from the graveyard, do it again, make infinite zombies. The thing I wanted to mention here, though, is the way Sibsig Ceremony works is when you cast a creature, you're gonna put a trigger on the stack that says destroy that creature, and then you create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Those two things are not dependent on each other. It doesn't say if that creature is destroyed, then you get the 2/2 black zombie. So what you can do is you play the Gravecrawler. It's going to put a trigger on the stack from Sibsig Ceremony saying destroy that creature. With that trigger on the stack, you can sack the Gravecrawler to Phyrexian Altar to make the mana. You're still going to get the 2/2 black zombie creature token, even though your Gravecrawler wasn't technically destroyed by Sibsig Ceremony. Then you can do it again. You cast the Gravecrawler from the graveyard with the destroy trigger on the stack, sack it to the Phyrexian Altar. So all this to say, it's important to realize that with Sibsig Ceremony, you do have this window to respond to the destroy your creature trigger, which is actually pretty important to some of the combos. In Standard, I am most excited to play this with a Rotodropic of Urborg. I love Rotodropic shenanigans. This is maybe the card that I'm going to be most sad when it rotates this summer. I love Rotodropic. It's never been a good card in Standard, but it has led to some really spectacular decks. So with Rotodropic, Sibsig Ceremony seems kind of absurd, right? So we could play our Rotodropic, then we play the Sibsig Ceremony, then all of our creatures are going to cost 2 less to cast. When they die, we don't really care because Rotodropic's going to make us a copy of them anyway. That happens to be a 2/2 black zombie, so it works really well together. My concern here, though, is it is very risky. If we play Rotodropic first and it sticks, everything is amazing, and we're going to pop off and have this huge turn. On the other hand, if we play our Rotodropic and then play our Sibsig Ceremony, and our opponent's like, maybe I'll kill that Rotodropic, then we're kind of in a pickle, right? Because we can't just play another Rotodropic because we're going to have to sacrifice it. It's going to get destroyed, rather, by the Sibsig Ceremony. So it's going to be interesting how we can make this work. It seems like when things go well, it's going to be spectacular, but there's also going to be the risk that we actually kind of lock ourselves out of the game with our own card. It might be worth playing some ways to get rid of our own Sibsig Ceremonies, just in case with a combo deck like this. You can also just play it to like generate value with creatures with ETB triggers, like Helpful Hunter. If you get a Sibsig Ceremony, it's 1 mana, draw a card, create a 2/2, pretty good. Or like Inspiring Overseer, same thing, plus you get to gain a life. So maybe there's some weird Panharmonicon chain thing together shell here. It also goes super easy infinite with Surrak the Archlich, which is probably most relevant for Pioneer, maybe like Explorer, Timeless, Historic. But the idea here is Surrak, when it comes into play, you gotta bounce it back to your hand if you haven't completed the Tomb of Annihilation dungeon, and you get to venture into a dungeon. So you can cast a Surrak for 1 mana with Sibsig Ceremony, and again, you get to stack the triggers, right? So you stack the Destroy trigger, so it resolves after the bounce of Surrak back to your hand trigger. So you Surrak, it bounces itself back to its hand. You still get the 2/2 zombie thanks to Sibsig Ceremony. And then if you have Relic of Legends, so you can tap a legend to make mana, you can tap the Surrak for a mana in between before you bounce it back to your hand. So you get to keep doing it again and again and again. You get to infinitely venture through dungeons and make infinite 2/2 zombies, which seems kind of ridiculous. So the Sibsig Ceremony, I love cards like this. This is definitely one of those wacky build around against the odds enchantments. It's not going to go in most decks. It's going to be horrible in most decks, actually. But in the right deck, with the right synergies, if you can build around it, it's a card that can do spectacular things. Next up, we get a new Surrak in Surrak Elusive Hunter. So a 3 mana 4/3 legendary human warrior that says this spell can't be countered. It has trample, and whenever a creature you control or a creature spell you control becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, draw a card. So Surrak, actually pretty spicy. It's essentially an upgraded Saber Sanctuary on a pretty reasonable uncounterable body. The upgrade here is it works with spells on the stack as well. So if you cast a creature spell and your opponent targets it on the stack with like a counter spell, you're going to draw off that. So it's like Saber Sanctuary plus plus plus, and I feel like Surrak might actually be a pretty good standard card. The downside, of course, is it isn't green, and we haven't really seen green take off, but with Llanowar Elves and Craterhoof Behemoth and this new Surrak, maybe green's time will finally come. I think this card is just very powerful. Like, it's got good stats, it's going to almost always replace itself, it's always going to resolve because it's uncounterable, it should almost always replace itself, unless your opponent has some sort of wrath to get rid of it, and then if your opponent targets your other stuff, it could generate a lot of card advantage. I saw some people being like, well, I think it's just the same, or even worse than Spinner of Souls. And I think Surrak is way better than Spinner of Souls. Spinner of Souls, you need the creature to die for it to do anything, and we just don't live in a world where creatures die that much. Like, sure, someone might go for the throat your creature, they might get lost your creature, but there's a lot of leyline bindings, there's a lot of exile-based removal, there's a lot of bounce-based removal out there. The Spinner of Souls just does nothing against, so I think I would much rather have a Surrak than a Spinner of Souls in my standard deck. So, like I said before, your Surrak can die, right? You play it and your opponent goes for the throat, but worst case, even if that happens, you get a card out of it, so it's really not that painful. It's kind of a built-in 2-for-1, and the best case is, maybe you're up against some sort of self-bounce deck. This could generate a ton of card advantage against this town ain't big enough if your opponent's just bouncing your stuff all the time, although it is a little bit sad that it does die to nowhere to run, so your opponent can't just like snipe the Surrak, but you'll still get a card out of it though, so it's really not the end of the world. So all this to say, Surrak, to me, assuming that green is playable, looks like a very good standard card. It gets around counters, it protects your creatures from removal, it protects them from bounce. Hilariously, though, it is a epically bad modern card for one big reason, and this is also the reason that I think that Surrak is actually kind of unplayable in Commander, as weird as that sounds. So the problem we have here is the way Surrak is worded. You insta-lose to an Orcish Bowmasters, which, not a problem in Standard, but if you're playing in Modern or in Commander, there's a lot of Orcish Bowmasters running around sometimes. So Orcish Bowmasters, when it enters, you get to ping one of your opponent's things for 1 damage, and then whenever your opponent draws a card except their first card for the turn, you get to do it again. So if you play a Surrak and your opponent plays Orcish Bowmasters, what happens is, they play the Bowmasters, they target the Surrak with the ping ability, before the ping even resolves, that's going to trigger Surrak to make you draw a card, which will trigger Orcish Bowmasters, which can then target the Surrak again, which will then draw a card, which will trigger the Bowmasters. Essentially, with a Surrak on the battlefield, if your opponent Orcish Bowmasters, they can just make you keep drawing drawing cards because it's not a May ability on Surrak until you draw your entire library and lose the game to milling out on the spot. There are ways around this. If you have like a Solitude or some sort of instant speed free interaction that you can cast to get rid of the Bowmasters, you can break the loop, but assuming you don't have that, you actually just straight up die to a single Orcish Bowmasters, which I think means that Surrak probably just too risky for Modern or Commander, but in Standard, it seems like a pretty real 3-drop. We also got a new Sultai Saga in Awaken the Honored Dead. So a 3-mana enchantment. First lore counter, destroy target non-land permanent. Second lore counter, mill 3 cards. Last lore counter, you can discard a card. When you do, return target creature land card from your graveyard to your hand. So Awaken the Honored Dead is pretty interesting. If you think about what it is, it's kind of like Vindicator, well, 2025 Vindicate, right? Because you can't blow up lands anymore. But it's kind of like a non-land Vindicate. Sorcery speed, blow up anything except for a land. Mill 3 is basically Stitcher Supplier's ETB, and if you kind of mash together the last 2 lore counters, you sort of build a grapple with the past where you mill 3 cards and get to get something back to your hand. You gotta discard a card, but whatever, that's not a huge deal. So is Awaken the Honored Dead actually a good card? Let's start with the no argument. The no argument is, we just had Void Rend in Standard. Void Rend blows up any non-land permanent at instant speed for 3 mana, and it can't even be countered. And Void Rend saw very minimal play in Standard through its entire run in Standard. I know Krim loves the card, and he played it in a lot of decks, but as far as actually being like a real tournament staple, admittedly, it's a pretty fringe card. In Awaken the Honored Dead removal mode, it's just worse than Void Rend, where it's at sorcery speed, it can be countered. Yes, you get the mill 3 and get a card back to your hand modes, which is nice, that's the upside, but I think it's pretty fair to wonder if Void Rend wasn't good enough to see play, is Awaken the Honored Dead gonna be good enough to see play? But there is an upside case here. Binding the Old God actually saw quite a bit of play in its time in Standard, is a 4-mana blow up a non-land permanent enchantment, but it also was guaranteed to ramp you, which was kind of an important part of the card. I think that just ramping a forest, probably better than milling 3 and returning a card from your graveyard to your hand, although that is some value still. So Binding the Old God started a lot of play, and there's reasons to play an effect like this. One of the things I love about it is it gets rid of anything, and I've come to really appreciate unconditional removal in this Standard because there's a lot of diverse permanent types that see play. Against some decks, you really gotta kill an Arbros Forge. Against some decks, you really gotta kill an enchantment like Caretaker's Talent. Against some decks, you're probably gonna have to kill Ugin Eye of the Storms, and Awaken the Honored Dead just gets rid of anything. It doesn't matter if it's an artifact or a creature, or an enchantment, or a planeswalker. Awaken the Honored Dead is going to get rid of it. The other thing that's pretty sweet about it is it's a permanent, and we've seen recently with the This Town Ain't Big Enough decks that sometimes having a spell-like effect on a permanent is a really, really big deal. So Awaken the Honored Dead, you can cast it, blow something up, This Town It back to your hand, do it again. It's an enchantment, so you can sack it to Beseech the Mirror, to bargain off of. It's also a permanent, so you can find it with stuff like Cash Grab by milling some cards. So there are a lot of synergies that you get out of Awaken the Honored Dead that you wouldn't get out of something like Void Rend, and I think that's where this card is going to shine. I think just as a generic removal spell in like Sultai midrange with no synergies, probably kind of fringe-ish, but once you start building around it and having these synergy pieces for it, I could see this being an actual very strong removal spell in the right deck. In older formats, you get even more synergies. Seems great in Inamac Incarnation, where you want enchantments that you're going to sacrifice, so enchantments with pseudo ETB triggers like Awaken the Honored Dead, really good, or Doom Foretold. You can play this and kill something and then have a permanent to sack to your Doom Foretold in the future. So those are the kind of synergies you're looking for. As far as Commander, I think the story is basically the same. Would I just play this in a generic Sultai deck? Probably not. But what if I'm playing a Sultai deck with graveyard synergies? It also cares about permanent types like Madrotha the Gravetide. Then this might actually be pretty sweet. It fills a graveyard, it blows something up. Eventually I can cast it again with Madrotha. Also, another decent saga for Tom Bombadil, which you can use any interaction you can get in a Tom Bombadil deck. So I think it probably is going to be the good there. So Awaken the Honored Dead, I like this card. I don't think it's a staple level removal spell that you play in every single deck, but I think in those specific decks that have synergies for a removal spell that's an enchantment and sitting out on the battlefield, or graveyard synergies, that's where Awaken the Honored Dead can really shine. Next up, we get a new dragon, a land-destroying dragon, a Magmatic Hellkite. So Magmatic Hellkite, 4 mana for a 4/5 dragon with flying. It says when it enters, destroy target non-basic land an opponent controls. Its controller searches their library for basic land, puts it on the battlefield tapped with a stun counter on it, and then shuffles. So Magmatic Hellkite, at first blush, it's essentially Krenko's Buzz Crusher, except Krenko's Buzz Crusher came from Murders of Karlov Manor, so it kind of sucks. Magmatic Hellkite is just a way better version. I guess the only difference is it doesn't scale for Commander like Krenko's Buzz Crusher, but in a 1v1 format, it's got more toughness, it's got a better ability because it puts a stun counter on it. Although, interestingly, maybe we can build a land destruction deck with both of these cards in Standard now. We got Magmatic Hellkite, we got Krenko's Buzz Crusher, we got Territory Forge, we got Confiscate. Maybe we can build an honest-to-goodness land destruction deck. We're going to have to go through the Standard meta, and the question's going to be, how many basic lands are decks playing? I feel like if we run into, like, Esper, or we run into some of the domain-style decks, maybe it can actually work. If we run into mono red though, oh god, we're gonna have a rough time because our Magmatic Hellkite's Krenko's Buzz Crusher is not really gonna do anything. But I think the idea of Standard land destruction is pretty interesting. The other thing I want to say about this card is I hope we see more of this. I have wanted stun counters on lands to be a thing for a long time because Wizards has essentially removed land destruction from the game of Magic, which I think is a bad thing. We talk a lot about how lands are pretty busted. We keep getting more strong utility lands, so lands keep getting more and more powerful, and they really take advantage of the fact that in modern Magic, Wizards just doesn't let you mess with your opponent's lands. I feel like stun counters might be a way to get Stone Rain style effects back into formats like Standard without being quite as brutal or soul crushing as the OG land destruction spells. So imagine a Stone Rain that's just like put 3 stun counters on a land or something. You're not really destroying the land, you're just making it unusable for a few turns. So I really hope that this is the first stun counter on land card of many to come, because I would really like to see Wizards embrace this more and use this as a way to get land destruction or pseudo land destruction back into the game a little bit. So Magmatic Hellkite, it's a pretty solid card. In Standard, I'm excited to build land destruction around it. Worst case, it's a good way to snipe powerful utility lands. I think that'll mostly be its purpose in Commander as well, where you can play this in a Dragon deck, and if your opponent has a Nykthos or a Cabal Coffers or something like that, this is a nice way that you can downgrade that into a basic land and put your opponent up a little mana for a turn, so it should be good there as well. In formats like Modern, probably not good enough. We just have other options that are a little bit cheaper or have more shenanigans to them. But I think that Magmatic Hellkite, super cool card, and I love the design of it. Wizards, keep adding stun counters to lands. I really want to see more of it. We also got a new Teamer legend in Eshki Dragonclaw. So a 4-mana 4/4 legendary human warrior. It is Vigilance, Trample, and Ward 1. And it says, be made combat on your turn. If you've cast both a creature spell and a non-creature spell this turn, draw a card and put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. So Eshki Dragonclaw, it seems fine. I think the idea of this card was to be the leader of a Harmonize deck, because Harmonize kind of cares about this mixture of non-creature spells and creature spells. Your Harmonize cards are spells, but then you want creatures to tap for the Harmonize cost. So I think that's the idea of this card, is if you want to build like, hey, I put all my Harmonize cards together, Eshki can be like the commander for that deck. Otherwise, I don't have much to say about this card. In Standard, if there's a Teamer mid-range deck that has a mixture of non-creature spells and creature spells, I can see playing a copy or two, like 4-mana 4/4 Ward, Trample, Vigilance. That's fine. Growing and drawing cards, if you can trigger it, it gets even better. It seems like it could be very powerful if it sticks out for a few turns, although that is a pretty big if in our current Standard. And in Commander, it's just kind of generic. I don't think it's bad. Like, you can definitely just build around it, but it doesn't really ask much of you, right? It's just like, play some non-creatures, play some creatures, play me, I'll generate some value, which is fine. Nothing wrong with cards like that, but it doesn't really push you in much of a direction. So Eshki seems like a fine card. It's just not a card that actually excites me personally all that much. We also got a new card draw spell that I think might actually be a little better than people are giving it credit for in Winternight Stories. So a 3-mana sorcery, it's a blue card, says draw 3 cards, then discard 2 cards, unless you discard a creature card, and then it has Harmonize of 5, so you can flash it back from the graveyard and even tap a creature to reduce the cost a bit if you want to. So Winternight Stories, it's next in the long line of compulsive research, thirst for discovery, thirst for knowledge, the these 3 mana card draw effects that let you draw 3 cards, but then you have to discard 2 cards unless you discard a specific type of card. Thankfully, discarding a creature card, actually not that bad. Like, a lot of decks are going to have creatures in them, so a lot of times it's going to be draw 3, discard 1. Plus, I think what really makes this card is the Harmonize mode, but more on that in a minute. So as far as Standard goes, the biggest concern for this card is there's a lot of competition in this slot. If you care about filling your graveyard, you have Kiora the Rising Tide, so you have Steam Core Scholar, which give you bodies and let you draw and discard and fill your graveyard. If you don't care about filling your graveyard, then stock up probably just better, grabbing 2 out of your top 5, mostly going to be better than drawing 3 and then discarding some. So the question's going to be, can this find room? There's certainly decks that would want this card, but is it going to be better than the other options? That's what we're going to have to wait and see. Like I said before, the biggest selling point of this card is definitely the Harmonize mode. The fact that you can do it twice, even if you have to pay full 5 mana for it, is not that bad, and there's going to be scenarios when you can cast this and then almost immediately harmonize it for 1 mana by tapping down a creature, and that's something that none of these other cards can do. So where can we actually play this card in Standard? And I think there's a few possibilities. So the most obvious one, the Born Oculus decks. This is another way that you can dig through your deck. You can get Oculus in your graveyard. You're drawing 3 cards for your Prophytic Memory, so it seems really good there. Plus, Oculus, perfect for harmonizing this. Imagine that you pay 3 mana in Winternight Stories, you discard your Oculus, you reanimate it for 1 mana, which your deck wants to do anyway. Then for 1 more mana, you can tap the Oculus and just immediately flashback or harmonize the Winternight Stories, draw 3 more cards, then you go to combat and you're gonna get like a million counters with Prophytic Memory. Also seems good with like the Haunting Jhin style decks. We got Enigma Drake back in Standard. Maybe you're just trying to fill your graveyard with spells. And again, these creatures are gonna have such high power that you're easily gonna be able to harmonize this back from the graveyard to draw even more cards. Another possibility, the reanimation decks. This is a good way to get your Omniscience in the graveyard for a Bulio's Awakening, to get your whatever Velgavoth in the graveyard, your Trox in the graveyard for Zombify. So that's another home for these cards. Also, the Tolarian Teraddy Merc Crab decks. This is a great way to stock your graveyard. They're big enough you can tap them for Harmonize, cast it for 1 mana. So that's already like 4 different decks in Standard where we could theoretically play this card. Like I said before, it's got to beat out the other options, but plenty of homes exist. I also wanted to mention the whole Harmonize mechanic is pretty cute with the survival mechanic. We haven't talked about this, I don't think, in spoiler season, but you can use Harmonize as a way to tap your Kona Rescue Beastie or any other survival creature without actually putting it into combat, which also seems pretty sweet. I even think this card could show up in older formats. There's actually an argument it's going to be better in older formats, probably in some sort of like Dredgevine style shell, where this is a lot of dredging once you get it going. Imagine like casting this, you dredge 3 times, you discard your Vengevines coming back into play for free, you tap your Vengevine, your Winternight Stories again for 1 mana, you dredge 3 more times, you're essentially going to have your entire library milled at that point. Like, it is probably going to win you the game. So I could see this working in some sort of dredge style shell. So I think that's what you're looking for with Winternight Stories. I think it is true if you're playing like a generic control deck that doesn't care about your graveyard, stock up's probably better. And there's going to be some creature decks where maybe you really want Kiora or Steam Core Scholar, but I think that this card, thanks to Harmonize, certainly can serve a role in Standard, and it might be even more busted in older formats. We also got a new, you can play any number of this card in Tempest Hawk. So Tempest Hawk, 3 mana 2/2 flying bird. It's a white card. It says when it deals combat damage to a player, you insert your library for a card named Tempest Hawk, reveal it and put it in your hand, and a deck can have any number of cards named Tempest Hawk. The thing that's most exciting about this card to me is it's a common, which is not because of Pauper. I don't know, maybe there's a Tempest Hawk deck in Pauper. That would actually kind of be hilarious if we wake up to a new Pauper meta that's like 40 Tempest Hawks and 20 planes. Probably not especially likely, but the real reason that being a common is such a big deal is that these you can play any number of cards tend to be oddly expensive, like $3, $4, $5 a piece, and they're usually uncommons, which makes it really hard to build a deck around them, because who wants to go out and spend, you know, hundreds of dollars to get enough Slimes Against Humanity or Dragon's Approaches to actually build a commander deck out of it? Tempest Hawk at a common should help keep the price in check. It also seems like one of the least powerful of the you can play any number cards. It is cool you can tutor up additional copies, but they're just 2/2 flyers. So compared to something like Slime Against Humanity, you're just not adding that much power to the battlefield. So maybe not a competitive card, but should be a good against the odds episode at least. Moving into the realm of lower rarity cards, we have an Omen Dragon that might be notable for constructed play. It's close at least, in Runescale Stormbrood. So a 4-mana 2/4 flying dragon with whenever you cast a non-creature spell or a dragon, it gets +2/+0 until end of turn. In its Omen mode, which is the reason it might be playable, Chilling Screech, 2-mana instant Omen, counter target spell with mana value 2 or less. So Runescale Stormblood, cheap counter mixed with a kind of okay dragon. I mean, a 4-mana 2/4 is not great, although it is worded like Slick Shot Show Off, where if you can sling some spells, it can get pretty big pretty quickly. So if this is going to see play, it's probably going to be in some sort of spell slingery style deck. The question is the counter spell mode good enough to actually play? If it was counter target spell, unless its controller pays to, I think this card would be incredibly strong. It would be a very, very playable card. Is the prohibit mode, counter target spell with mana value 2 or less, is that enough for it to see play? And there, I'm not exactly sure, but I did want to mention it because I think it's like close enough to being playable that it wouldn't shock me if we ended up in a meta where this was going to be good. It's really going to depend on how much you can counter with the Chilling Screech mode, but if that mode's good, then I think the card's playable. So we'll have to keep an eye on this one as we move into our new standard format. Rounding things out today, we still haven't seen a rare dual land cycle from the set, so who knows what rare lands we're getting, if any at all, but we have started to see some limited fixing. So for limited, we have the Devotee cycle, which are cheap creatures that let you pay generic mana to make 1 mana of 3 colors. There's 1 for each wedge, so like Mardu Devotee, a 1 mana 1/2 that when it enters, you scry 2, and then you can pay a generic mana to make a red or a white or a black once a turn. A Teamer Devotee, kind of the same thing, 2 mana 3/3 defender, can pay 1 to make Teamer mana. Abzan Devotee, 2 mana 2/1, they can make mana, or you can pay 3 to return it from your graveyard to your hand. Jeskai Devotee has Flurry, so it gets +1/+1 when you cast your second spell, and it can make the mana. Sultai Devotee, maybe the best one, a 2 mana 2/1 Death Toucher that can fix your mana. So these cards, we'll have to wait and see. Some of them could like sneak into constructed, like Mardu Devotee, a 1 mana 1/2 that scries 2 when it enters. That's not that far off from like a Novice Inspector style of effect. So I could see that showing up in decks. Same with Sultai Devotee because of Death Touch, like it's a pretty powerful ability. Worst case, I expect these will be pretty key fixers for limited, just like the Cheaty lands. We also are getting the Cheaty land backs, the common dual lands that when they enter, you get to gain 1 life. These are actually, I think, the worst common duels in Commander, because I know if you play these on turn 1 and you gain a life to go to 41, you're probably going to take like 5 the next turn cycle because people are going to be like, oh, you have the highest life total, but they are fine fixing for limited. Otherwise, a little bit of draft chaff that you can check out over at MTGpreviews.com. Anyway, that brings us to the end of day 2 of our Tarkir Dragonstorm spoilers. And this set is just so amazing. I am in love with this set. Hopefully y'all are loving it as well. Let me know what you think about these cards. Which ones are you most hyped for? Let me know in the comments. And I'll be back tomorrow with even more Tarkir Dragonstorm spoilers. So until then, have a lovely day, everyone. And I will talk to you soon. Looking for even more magic? Well, you can find yesterday's spoiler video here. Or maybe check out the video about the deck that actually bored pros to death on the Pro Tour.